All right. Are you ready for a depth dive? We're going to be tackling Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Um, it's a book with some seriously big ideas packed in.
It's true.
Like, it's almost overwhelming, right?
It really is.
So we're here to kind of guide you to the best parts.
Yeah, it's a feast that really begins with a deceptively simple question.
Mhm.
And it's posed by a New Guinean politician named Yali. And he asked Diamond, why do you white people have so much cargo and we New Guineans have so little? Now, obviously, that could spark a whole other conversation about terminology, but at its core, it's a question about the roots of global inequality.
Yeah, and Diamond just jumps right in and uses this question to launch into this search for why society has developed so differently throughout history. But I think the important distinction here is that Diamond isn't trying to justify those disparities. He's trying to understand how they came to be. He's not just interested in the what, he's interested in the why.
And that's where his focus on the distant past is so important. Because he's not just looking at recent colonialism. He's going way back to the very foundations of societies. And he does it with this incredibly wide lens. He's examining interactions between various non-European societies. So we're talking Africa, Southeast Asia, the Americas. It's really about piecing together this global puzzle of human development.
Okay, so let's talk about that cargo question for a second. Is Diamond saying that some societies just kind of got lucky and stumbled onto the path to, well, having more stuff? Because that seems a little simplistic, doesn't it?
It does, and that's where Diamond's argument gets really interesting. You see, there's this common misconception that life before farming, back in our hunter-gatherer days, was necessarily worse. You know, that whole nasty, brutish, and short idea. But Diamond really complicates that narrative.
Okay, I'm listening, although I will say I'm pretty attached to my comfy apartment and, grocery delivery apps. I'm not sure how long I would last foraging for berries out in the wilderness.
I hear you, but that's precisely what Diamond wants us to question. It's not that farming was like this magical solution that instantly made life better. After all, modern food production is not exactly a walk in the park.
Oh, tell me about it. Have you ever tried to wrangle a vegetable garden during the summer? It is a full-time job.
Absolutely. The key difference, according to Diamond, is that food production, particularly farming, created the conditions for denser populations. More people means more specialization of labor, more complex social structures, and ultimately more powerful societies.
Okay, denser populations, more specialization. Yeah, I can see where this is going. But how does that explain why some parts of the world surged ahead while others lagged behind? Was it just about who figured out farming first?
It's more nuanced than that. Diamond argues that the types of plants and animals available for domestication played a huge role. And this is where things get really interesting, because it wasn't always about what humans intended to domesticate.
Wait, so you're telling me like those juicy watermelons we love, that those weren't always on the menu? What were our ancestors working with?
Well, take almonds, for example. Did you know that the wild ancestors of those crunchy snacks were actually poisonous?
Whoa, seriously. The almonds I sprinkle on my yogurt could knock me out in their wild form. Okay, now I have V to hear more about this.
Right. It's a fascinating example of accidental domestication. Early farmers, without realizing the long-term implications, were naturally drawn to bigger, sweeter almonds. Over generations, they inadvertently selected for a non-poisonous variety.
Wow, talk about a happy accident. So it wasn't just a matter of humans deciding, hey, let's farm. It was about the specific characteristics of the plants and animals in a given region, like winning the botanical lottery.
Precisely. Diamond highlights factors like seed size abundance, even things called germination inhibitors, all playing a part in which plants could be effectively domesticated. And that's just the plant side of the story. The availability of large mammals suitable for domestication was another crucial piece of the puzzle.
Okay, I see where you're going with this Buffett analogy again.
Imagine two groups of early humans, both ready to start farming. One group has a small selection of finicky plants and maybe a few scrawny animals. The other group, they've got a smorgasbord of potential crops and a handful of large, relatively docile animals just begging to be domesticated. Who do you think has a head start?
Okay, Buffet wins every time. So where does this leave Eurasia in the grand scheme of things?
Diamond argues that Eurasia was like that lucky group at the buffet. It had this incredible head start, not just because of the sheer diversity of plants and animals, but because of its east-west axis. This allowed crops and livestock to spread more easily across similar climates and latitudes. It's a stark contrast to the Americas, which have a predominantly north-south axis, meaning plants and animals had to adapt to vastly different climates to spread.
So it's like the difference between sharing gardening tips with your next door neighbor versus trying to teach someone across the world with completely different growing conditions.
Exactly. And this ease of diffusion wasn't just limited to crops and livestock. Ideas, technologies, even diseases could spread more readily in this interconnected landmass.
Hold on, diseases. How do those factor into this whole equation?
Well, you know how they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger? That applies to societies, too, at least when it comes to diseases.
Okay, I have a feeling you're about to tell me something both fascinating and a little bit terrifying, aren't you?
Perhaps. Diamond dedicates a whole chapter to what he calls the lethal gift of livestock. You see, many of the diseases that have ravaged human populations throughout history originated in animals.
Wait a minute. Are you about to launch into a story about a doctor, a sick patient, and some personal questions? Because I gotta say, Diamond knows how to grab a reader's attention.
That's one way to put it. But yes, Diamond uses that rather, shall we say, colorful anecdote to illustrate a critical point. The close proximity of humans and livestock in Eurasia created a perfect breeding ground for diseases to jump from animals to humans.
So basically, Eurasians got a head start on building up their immune systems, even if it wasn't exactly pleasant at the time.
Precisely. And when those disease-carrying Eurasians eventually made contact with populations that hadn't developed immunity, the consequences were devastating.
Like that whole smallpox epidemic in the Americas. Talk about a tragic, unintended consequence of those East-West connections.
Exactly. Smallpox decimated Native American populations who had no prior exposure and therefore no built-up immunity. It was like a biological weapon, albeit an unintentional one.
It's a chilling reminder that sometimes, even with the best of intentions, contact between societies can have devastating consequences.
And it highlights the often overlooked role of germs in shaping the course of human history.
Okay, so we've got Eurasia with its abundance of domesticable plants and animals, its east-west axis facilitating the spread of everything from wheat to measles and its large interconnected populations. Where does that leave a place like Australia? It's a huge continent. People have been living there for a long time. Why didn't it follow a similar trajectory?
That's a question Diamond tackles head-on, and it's a great example of how he uses specific cases to test his broader theories. Australia, despite its size and long history of human habitation, remained largely isolated from those Eurasian exchanges.
Okay, isolation makes sense. But Australia is also known for its unique ecosystem. What role did that play in its development?
A significant one. Australia is mostly arid with unpredictable rainfall patterns, often driven by El Niño events. This made it difficult to support large, dense populations, which, as we've discussed, are crucial for the development of complex societies.
So even if Aboriginal Australians had stumbled upon farming, the environment itself would presented a huge obstacle to replicating what we saw in Eurasia.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. The environment just wouldn't support it. And then there's the question of what was available to farm.
Because a continent full of kangaroos isn't exactly conducive to starting a plow-based agricultural revolution.
You got it. Australia had very few plants and animals that were suitable for domestication.
Diamond even tells that story about those European explorers, Burke and Wills, who ended up starving in the Australian outback even though they had guns.
A perfect example of how technology isn't always the trump card. The local Aboriginal people, meanwhile, were thriving in that same environment thanks to their deep knowledge of the land and its resources accumulated over millennia.
It's like having the latest smartphone but no cell service. You might have the technology, but it's useless without the right infrastructure or knowledge to support it.
Precisely. And that contrast highlights the importance of adapting to your environment, not just trying to impose your will on it.
Okay, so we've got geography playing this massive role in shaping societies, almost like this invisible hand guiding their destinies. But is it really that simple? Can we chalk it all up to latitude and livestock?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And to be fair, Diamond himself acknowledges that geography isn't the be-all and end-all. He doesn't discount the role of human decisions, cultural factors, even the unpredictable twists and turns of history. He argues it's more about how these forces interact.
So it's not just about where you are on the map, but also about the choices people make, the beliefs they hold. And yeah, maybe a sprinkle of luck along the way.
Exactly. It's like baking a cake. You need the right ingredients, sure, but the oven temperature, the mixing technique, those matter too. And to illustrate this point, Diamond takes us on this fascinating detour to the Polynesian Islands.
Polynesia.
As in those idyllic islands with crystal clear waters and, well, I'm guessing the history is a bit more complicated than a postcard.
You could say that. What makes Polynesia so fascinating is that it's like this giant natural experiment. You have these islands all settled by people with a common ancestry, but with vastly different environments. Some are tiny atolls with limited resources, while others, like Hawaii, are volcanic islands bursting with potential.
Okay, so it's like nature set up these mini-continents, each with its own unique set of advantages and challenges, to see how humans would adapt. Exactly. And what Diamond found is that those environmental variations led to strikingly different social structures. The islands with abundant resources, fertile land, those places developed complex hierarchies, specialized labor, even powerful chiefs who ruled like kings.
So it's not just about whether you have farming, it's about the abundance and variety of resources you've got to work with. It's like if you're constantly struggling to survive, you're probably not building elaborate temples or inventing writing systems in your spare time.
Precisely. The Polynesian case study also highlights the importance of something else, contact between societies. The islands that were most isolated, those tended to develop the simplest social structures. They lacked the trade, the exchange of ideas, even the competition that fueled innovation on the more connected islands.
It's like that saying, iron sharpens iron. Even conflict, though obviously destructive, can sometimes be a catalyst for innovation and advancement, at least in this context.
That's a key insight, and brings us back to Europe's rise to global dominance. Diamond argues that in a way Europe's geography, with its fragmented landscape and its history of competing states and cultural exchange, actually gave it an edge.
Hold on, so while China might have had an early lead in terms of developing a unified, technologically advanced society, Europe's disunity, all that squabbling and competition, that ended up being their secret weapon.
In a sense, yes. That constant jockeying for power, combined with Europe's access to a wider range of resources and technologies, thanks to those east-west connections we talked about, created this pressure cooker of innovation.
It's like a giant historical game of King of the Hill, with different societies vying for dominance. And Europe, despite its internal squabbles, managed to come out on top.
And once Europe gained that technological and military edge, it was able to project its power outward, leading to the colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Australia.
Which brings us full circle back to Yali's question. Why do some societies have so much more cargo than others? Diamond's answer, as we've seen, isn't a simple one. It's this intricate tapestry of geography, food production, germs technology, and even a bit of historical luck, all interwoven.
And while his work has been incredibly influential, sparking countless debates and discussions, it's essential to remember that no single theory can fully explain the complexities of human history. But what Diamond offers is a powerful framework, a new lens through which we can view the past and perhaps better understand the forces that have shaped our present.
It's like he's handed us this map and compass and said, all right, go explore, see where these ideas take. And they question everything. And that's what I love about guns, germs, and steel. It's not a definitive answer, but a starting point for a much larger conversation.
And that is the beauty of engaging with history. It's an ongoing dialogue, a constant process of questioning and reinterpreting the past.
So to everyone listening, consider this your invitation to join that conversation. Pick up guns, germs, and steel, wrestle with its ideas, and see what you discover. Does geography hold as much sway as Diamond argues? What other factors might play a role? Because ultimately it's up to each of us to grapple with these questions and shape our understanding of the world.